again, I want to say Akwaba, which means welcome. And we have arrived at the 2021 Black Sustainability Summit. It's our 6th annual. Welcome, welcome, welcome. A little disclaimer before we get started. Trust and verify. All of our presenters are doing solid work indeed. Their affiliation with our summit is due to our alignment with their goals and mission. The presentations provided at our summit does not constitute an endorsement of speakers' views, products, or services. And we want to thank our booths, which are the Black-owned and operated sponsors, the Black Handcraft, Collard Green Festival Collective, Sustainable Community Solutions Network, the Eco Womanist Institute, and Adiki Aya International Development and Indigenous Knowledge Institution. Give thanks for all of your support and all that you do. And speaking of support, big ups to our volunteers, the Black Sustainability Summit volunteers. Here you see a full list of busy, worthy people. Give thanks. Medasi Pa. And as stated before, you all are in our current session to educate a people solutions with Mwalimu Baruti. But before we bring him up, there are a few things that I'd like to share with you before we get started. First of all, I think everyone is muted. However, if not, go ahead and mute your mics. That is to eliminate the background noise. But because Baba Baruti's session is recorded, we want to make sure that he and all of his wisdom words are heard as crystal clear as possible. So keep your mics muted until it's time for you to come on the mic, if you so choose. Also, as you join this session, we would love for you, all in this room and all that is coming, all that who are coming, to go ahead now and even later drop your information, your name, your location, your contact information in the chat box as I am talking, so that not only will the recording be shared, will also the chat log. The chat log will be shared with you as well. So if there, especially for Mwalimu Baruti's information, but if there are some additional attendees whose information you need, it'll be right there in the chat log. So give thanks. So Baba Baruti will present a 45-minute presentation. And then for the final 15 minutes of the session, he'll open it up for 15 minutes of Q&A. And you have multiple ways of being heard. You can use that little device in your dashboard to raise your hand. If you just raise your hand and stay silent, you might not be called on, but use that little device that allows you to raise your hand. You can actually unmute your mic and speak and state your question that way. And then, of course, you can type out your question in the chat box. And between myself and technical support, we will find your questions, present them to Baba Baruti, and then carry on with the Q&A session. Just to reiterate, to educate a people, solutions with Mwalimu Baruti. My name is Njideka Kamo, and I am a proud moderator for this session. So without any further delay, I'd like to go ahead and get into our session. I want to tell you a little bit about Mwalimu Baruti. He is the co-founder and co-director of Akaben Institute, a full-time independent African-centered homeschooling program for middle and high schoolers which is celebrating its 22nd year of service to our community. There's going to be several moments, so be ready to clap again. He has written and self-published 27 books and 3 workbooks addressing issues ranging from manhood to chess, to the middle passage, to relationships, to education, to security, and on and on and on. He is a former faculty at Chicago State University and Morehouse College. For the last 2 decades, he has continued this work through teaching courses, classes, and lectures online and at Akabin Institute for Adults and Youth. My daughter was one of the youth students. He has been married to Ya Mausi Baruti for 36 years, and they have 1 daughter, Alaya, who lives with her husband and 6 children. So please, everyone, this is a living legend who is about to speak and carry out some very strong wisdom words to all of us. And Baba Baruti, you have lots to be proud of. And then for your recipients, your students, and the attendees today, there is a lot to be grateful for. So we give thanks for all of your past, present, and future efforts. And so without any further delay, let's all welcome Mwalimu K. Bomani Baruti.
Of course, I'm honored to be here. I don't know how to follow that up. I will make one change because I'm living with this person, have been living with this person now for 36 years.
Right.
37. I don't want there to be any error in that. But it's an honor to be here. I remember when the Black Sustainability Summit first began. And of course, we knew Afia Reina a long time before that, and the power of this woman, the power of this sister in terms of having a vision and bringing it to fruition is incredibly impressive. So we're honored to be here, and I say we because I don't speak by myself. Any eyes with me as well. And of course, you, Sister Njideka, it's always a pleasure to be in your presence. It was a pleasure to have you at Akabin when you were here. It was a pleasure to have you in the raised bed garden when you were here. It was a pleasure to have you here doing the work along with us. So it's an honor to have you as the moderator in this, as the introducer in this. Now I have a PowerPoint which I want to go through. I'm going to need to go through it fast because there's a lot of material. I don't know how far I'm going to get. I'm going to try my best. No, I'm going to stay within my 45-minute time frame, but there's a lot to be covered here. And so we're going to go from here. I'm going to ask. No, I'm going to wait till I get to that point. There are 3 parts to this. One has to do with the vision, the other has to do with teachings, and the other has to do with the institution itself of African-centered education. Of course, the picture up is the book that I wrote on education called The Educated People, which has pretty much the bulk of what I know about educating African people and the vision that we should have, and discussions about how to do this correctly at all levels, because we're not just talking about institutions, we're talking about homeschooling, we're talking about everywhere that African people do this work. And of course, those who are, whether you're an educator, primary educator or not, I would strongly suggest, of course, that you pick up a copy and read this book on African-centered education. So again, I said, I'm going to be moving fast. I'm not trying to run through things, but there are so many points that I want to cover. Of course, all of this is covered in the book, but I want to make sure that I cover all, however many slides this is before we get to the Q&A. Okay, come on. The solution lies in the vision. That's part 1 of this. The solution lies in the vision. What is our vision for African people? What are we trying to do? What is this African-centered education? Where are we trying to guide the youth and adults, because it's not just about children, it's not just about young folk, it's also about youth. There's a brother in England who connected with me a number of years ago, and he woke up at 78 years of age, wanting to know everything at that point in time. So it's just, when we think about education, of course, most of the time we think about youth because that's the primary individuals involved, at least at the student level, but it's anybody who wants to move in the direction of being African. So the solution lies in the vision. And to me, the vision is really, really easy. What makes it complicated is that we're trying to fight to hold on to Urugu, to the Europeans' way, at the same time that we're trying to be African. So we want to pretend or put on the face or the image of being African, but the heart isn't there, the soul isn't there, the spirit isn't there. And this definition by one of our greatest warrior ancestors, by Ajay Koto, to me is the best definition of African-centered education that I have come across, and I want to go through that quickly. I would ask people to take a picture of this, as well as the set of slides that I have in the solution is, what do I have that title? The solution is in the teachings. Because as I said, I'm going to go, and these are things you can go back over, and we need to have, just like I have this typed up on my wall, or on a wall in this house, and I read it fairly regularly because it's a very, 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 very deep definition. It's sort of like the difference between mentor and the definition of a jegna. And the definition of a mentor doesn't compare in any way, shape, form, or fashion. That talks to the definition of jegna, speaks to the character of the individual, the accomplishments of the individual, the evidence of what they have done for African people, versus a mentor. That's just somebody who comes along and maybe takes you to the baseball game and pats you on the back for, you know, getting good grades. So the difference here in terms of just getting an education, an African-centered education, is very, very clear. And now, Koto says African-centered education is rooted in the unique history and evolved culture, because culture is not static. It changes over time. It adjusts, even though the heart stays the same. And that's an important point that we need to realize or consider, bear in mind constantly as we're talking about African-centered education in terms of the cultural component, because a lot of people will use the word culture against us because they will argue that when we talk about culture, we're only talking about traditional, ancient, whatever African society, civilization. And even though some of the ritual may have changed, even though some of the colors may have changed, even though some of the tools used may have changed, the heart, the spirit is still the same. And when we talk about culture, we're talking about the heart and the spirit, not just the things that you visibly see or the practices that are imitation of someone else. So African-centered education is rooted in unique history and evolved culture of African people. It is defined in its singular, uncompromised, myopic, if you will, just looking in that one African direction. It is defined in its singular commitment to the elucidation of that history, that culture, and the confirmation, invigoration, and perpetuation of the African collective identity that emanates from that history and culture. We're about being African. We're about teaching what it means to be African. Those two things together, that is the manifestation of what it means to be African, and there can't be any other way. There's no such thing as a society where two cultures dominate. There's no such thing as a mind where two cultures dominate. One culture is going to dominate. And for us, for African-centered educators, that culture has to be African. African-centered education is concerned with the origins, original status, and future of the African world. African-centered education is committed to correcting the historical distortions born of 3 millennia of foreign invasion, destruction, enslavement, physical and mental colonialism, cultural disruption, and dependency. Our mission is to correct the Ma'afa, to correct the damage that the Ma'afa has and continues to do. It's not over. Our job is to make sure that those people whose ears we touch, whose hearts we touch, understand what has happened through African eyes, through our truth, not through someone else's lies, but through our truth. African-centered education is committed to rooting or anchoring the spiritual and intellectual energies of African people in the spiritual, moral, and philosophical traditions of Africa. Everything keeps coming back to Africa because that's who we are. We are our ancestors. African-centered, whether in the several nations of the diaspora or on the motherland, is concerned to fully develop the sense of African nationality, Garveyism, African nationality within a broader Pan-African world, not limited to any space, any particular point on this planet, any geographical designation. It's our world. African-centered education is concerned to sever irrevocably the pathological and slavish linkage of Africans to the European or Asian ethos. We need to think as Africans. We need to move as Africans. We need to believe as Africans. We need to have an African-centered worldview. We need to know who we are. We need to know who our ancestors are. African-centered education is concerned to enable the African person with nation building, nation management, and nation maintenance abilities. Every time I read that, I think about Najee Henry Clark. African-centered education is concerned to motivate teacher, student, parent, and community to advance the African nation world by any means necessary. And this is the book that was taken out of. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is the most important book that anyone who's trying to be an African-centered educator needs to read. This is the most important book on African-centered education I've ever read. And this is the website for it. Take a picture of it, please. Order you a copy. Read this book. It is extremely important. They have another book called The Sankofa Movement, but for me, this is the most, well, the Sankofa Movement is also a profound piece. It's also a classic, but we're talking about African-centered education at the moment. So please get a copy of this book and read it. Stop whatever other reading you're doing, get a copy of this and read it. And we move on to The Solution Lies in Teachings. And this is the one that I want you to take when we get to this description. When we get to the charts that distinguish between the different types of people who are standing in front of our children. So when we're talking about the solution lies in the teachings, we're talking about the quality of the educators. What are they bringing to the table? Because who else is delivering the word? So we need to know who's delivering the word. What about them is worthy of them standing in front of our children or standing in front of us? What gives them the right? What about their politics? What about the way that they live? What about the non-contradictory nature of their being? Because our ancestors said thought, word, and deed should be matching. So what is it about our educators? We need to measure. No one should be standing in front of any of our children without us knowing who they are and what they're about.
Mipacho, Baba, are you able to make the screen wide? Can you go into wide mode?
I can do that.
Medasipa.
That's better?
Ane.
Better.
Great, great. Okay, so we want to know the quality of the educators, who's educating us, and the nature and politics of the education that they're bringing. Because you can have someone who appears to be, a wonderful educator, but they're bringing Negro stuff within that. They're bringing Urugu's information within. They're bringing your reason to us and our children. And that should never be the case. That should never be allowed. That should never be allowed in our institutions. If we're allowing it, that means we're compromised. That means that we're not African-centered institutions. We're not African-centered educators. And I distinguish between three types of people who stand in front of our children. And I think it's important. People will say, well, your name calling and all the rest of that. Well, everybody does that. All of us put different people into different categories, every single solitary one of us. And the main reason we do that is because you have to have ways of analyzing, interpreting, being able to know who's coming at you before they come at you, whether that's good or bad. Because you can't sit there and get to know every single person you meet intimately. So you're going to put people into categories. We do that. It also helps us understand who we're dealing with so we can put people in certain places and keep them at certain distances or closeness to us. So I said we have warriors, we have Negroes, and we have lost souls. And their politics are very, very different. very, very different relative to the education of our children and us. And I ask folks to bear in mind Patel Tep's statement, which is one of my favorite quotes. He who teaches speaks to the future. If we bear that in mind, and if the future are our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren, and our great-great-grandchildren on, then we need to be very careful about what they're hearing. They need to get what it means to be African before they get an interpretation of what Yoruba is. So these are the charts. And I ask everybody, all of these are in the book To Educated People, but I ask people to take pictures of these because we need to know the difference. We need to know the distinctions between these groups. And I want to go through a few, even though I'm going to go through all of them for you to take pictures of, or slide or copy, however you do it. But I want to go through a few so we can, understand basically in terms of their fundamental politics, their fundamental loyalties, their fundamental aspirations, the level of energy that they bring, the mentality that they bring into the classroom, or into the home, how they think. So in terms of political orientation, educators are different than teachers who are different than programmers. And for me, educators are the warriors, teachers are the Negroes, programmers are the lost souls. So educators, their primary political orientation is Pan-African nationalism. Nationalism. That means that your concern is with the power, the improvement, the security, the identity of the African nation, including every African on this planet, even the ones who are completely and totally lost, which is a whole nother discussion in terms of what needs to be done for them. So the political orientation is Pan-African nationalism, revolutionary sovereignty-seeking nation building because we are at war. I don't know if that will ever not be the case, but we are at war. So if we understand that we're at war and we call ourselves warriors, understanding that war is the root word of warrior, then we know that we have to be revolutionary. Anybody who's not being revolutionary is a traitor, technically. If they're consciously acting on that. What you hear so many times, if the revolutionary should be the norm because of the Ma'afa, because of the efforts put into destroying us, in terms of the effort being put into destroying the minds of our children. This is a conscious effort. That's why we named Akaben Institute because Akaben is the Adinkra symbol for the war horn. And we understand that our calling is to wake our children up to the fact that they are at war and prepare them for the battlefield. The political orientation of educators, working outside of the system. The idea that you can go in and change that, this dinosaur, this system that is doing exactly what it was designed to do, makes no sense to me. We were trying to work outside the system because when you're outside of the system, then you dictate what's going to be taught. You dictate the conditions. You create the atmosphere. You create the safe, sacred spaces within which we learn. You do that. No one else controls that when you are independent. But if you're in the system, you're not independent. It's not possible for you to be independent in the system. There's no way that a Negro could come to Akaben Institute and become a teacher here. There's no way. It would not be allowed in the second I found out, or if we found out beforehand. There's no way, because that's not the mentality. That's not the politics that we want to have passed on to the children. Just like there's no way that any public school system is going to allow me to come in there and teach. That would be foolish on their part. Academic qualifications in terms of who's going to be educating our children. The priority in anybody's education. Oh, I didn't go over wow, running so fast. I didn't even go over Negroes and lost souls or teachers and programmers. So with teachers, intellectualized patriotism to Yoruba's reality. Their job is to turn their children into little Yoruba. That's their job. The job is to teach their children to be patriotic to Yurugu and Yurugu's way. That's their job. And I know for some people this is confusing, and we say teachers. Well, we say teachers within the African Center community. But I'm hoping that we understand the difference in mentality, and maybe one day we will be using the word educator instead of teachers or something else. If we decide that this collection of categories is correct and that teachers are not what we want, that we want educators. For programmers, for lost souls, lost souls are individuals who, well, briefly stated, Negroes work against us, but they do so consciously. They're very much aware of the fact that they love Yurugu and that African educators and African-centered people are the enemy because they're Yurugu's enemy. So they work very diligently to make sure that anybody who's African-centered is removed from the environment, that anybody who's African-centered is easily destroyed, that they are unable to do the things they need to do. Negroes consciously do that. Lost souls don't. Lost souls don't want to be bothered with politics. They no, let me have my widescreen, my car, whatever case may be. I don't want to be involved. I'm walking around on these eggshells, and this is good. Don't bring me into that mess. Don't try to bring me any politics. I just want peace. So I will follow whatever instructions I'm given without thinking about it because I don't want any trouble. Blind patriotism, blind popular patriotism to Yurugu's reality. Non-thinking. Teachers educate Negroes, they think about it. They try to find ways to improve the quality of their patriotism. Lost souls programmers, whatever is sanctioned by the state, whatever the state says, whatever the education system says, that's what they're moving on. That's what they're going to do. They operate in a greater level of fear than Negroes do, or at a greater level of fear. Academic qualifications, and we're rolling out of time, so let me skip. Please take a picture of this one if you want to. I'll count to 5, because we're talking about differences in the importance of credentials versus differences in the importance of what you know and your politics and what you teach and the level of love that you have for African children. The level of love that you have for the African nation. Very different. Level of consciousness. This is really an extension of what was said in the first one. I'm going, as I said again, going semi-slow because I want you all to get these. There are a number of these, and I'm down to about 19 minutes. Sense of accountability, which is extremely important. Who are you loyal to? Who are you fighting for? Who do you think, what do you think is going to happen to you if you treat people in a certain way? So educators, African warrior scholars, they understand their priority is assisting African people because they know that by assisting African people, they assist themselves. And that's not a selfish thing, even though it could possibly be. They know that by helping African people that they help themselves. They help to create this nation. It's sort of like African individualism. Europeans aren't the ones that only have individualism. Europeans just have that extreme individualism. African individualism is based on you competing with other Africans so that you can become the best that you can become, because the better you are, then the more you can contribute to your community, the better you can make your community, therefore, the better your life is going to be. So accountability, that sense of being beholden, being loyal, doing things for other people because you know that those are your people. Versus teachers, their accountability isn't to African people, just like most politicians, which is a good example of that. Their accountability is Yurugu, whoever's giving them the paycheck. That's who they're loyal to. That's who they feel accountable to. Dedication to everything that the sub-integrative African-American mentality entails. Anything that allows them to believe that they're equal to, but knowing that they're less than, in this societal context, Yurugu. Cultural source and allegiance, educators, an exclusive African interpretation of reality and way. Exclusive. It means that there's nothing important to us, even though we understand these other cultures and cultural imperatives. But our loyalty, what we act on, what we think out of, how we move, that's all African. That's all African, uncontaminated African. The spirit of what it means to be African. That's the important part of whatever it is that we do. Tools and teaching technology. And I find this wonderful in terms of now people are beginning to imitate this and mimic this more. African-centered educators have always used whatever was in the environment to educate. African-centered educators are known for those teachable moments where they find this anthill, or they walking around the neighborhood and they see soffits which speak to ventilation, which speak to science. They're constantly looking to the environment, just like our ancestors constantly looked to the universe to figure out exactly what direction they should take, how they should interpret reality. So nature is the blackboard for African-centered educators. Nature provides all the answers that we need, because education is supposed to be about teaching children how to survive when they become adults. Of course, for African-centered educator, I say it goes more than that. It teaches them how to live, how to be African. Versus for teachers and programmers, it's whatever Urugu supplies or whatever Urugu okays, whether it's the tool or the environment, the resource or whatever. Their vision for warriors in training in African people, educators, is sovereignty, complete and total sovereignty. That's the end result, complete and total sovereignty. Not a piece of this or a piece of that, or this kind of privilege or this kind of prestige or what have you. No, Pan-African sovereignty, period. For teachers and programmers, sub-integration, and I don't say integration, because integration or similar, whatever, it means that you're bringing same something and they're bringing something and it's considered to be equal value and you all mix it up. For us, we brought in stuff and we were brought in underneath them. So they were able to pick and choose those things that reflected us that were acceptable or palatable to them. So we haven't been integrated in anything. We've been sub-integrated into it. And then we have adopted their way, which makes us less than them because they remain the authority. They remain the dominant force in that. Personal character traits, no compromise. That doesn't mean that people don't make mistakes. But they shouldn't be big mistakes. They shouldn't be mistakes that undermine the workings of an African-centered institution, African-centered education, be it homeschooling, whatever. It shouldn't be anything that compromises that. And as we get older, as the Africans would say, the older person, I believe Arma articulated it well, the older person should be corrected. Excuse me, the younger person should be corrected, but the older person should be corrected more because they should know better. So as we get older, then those contradictions or errors should become less and less and less and less, because we're supposed to be learning from what the womb to the tomb. We're supposed to be learning. It's supposed to be a process. It's never ending. And that's something that we find in our traditions. It was understood. You learned from the time before you came till after you were gone. It never stopped. It never stopped. Versus within the European context, you're learning for a particular reason, a particular job, a particular what have you, and then the learning stops. I'm amazed at the studies that look at reading and who's reading. And most Black folks, once they finish high school or college, that's the end of their reading career. And often when they were in high school or middle school or elementary school or college, they read only what was required, for them to pass the course. That was it. And that's not our tradition. That's not our way. And it's changed. I talk to the young folks. One of the things that I heavily emphasize is the fact that it's an error that we look at what we see today as if this is the way we've always been. And if you go back to when I was a child, the idea that you're supposed to get an education because no one can take that away from you, that you're supposed to learn for the sake of learning, that's gone. That's gone in like 3 generations. That's gone, pretty much. That's gone. That's not to say it can't be returned, but that's gone. Racial orientation, race first. Not a Marcus Mosiah Garvey, race first. Nothing comes before African people. Nothing becomes before African people. For educators, excuse me, for teachers, for programmers, racial orientation is not us, it's against us. Absolutely against us. Degree of commitment, that's to me pretty much self-explanatory. You're totally committed. If you're crazy enough to decide in this reality that you want to become an African-centered educator, that you want to teach our children the truth, if you want to teach our children about their power and the use of that power in service of African people, that speaks to your level of commitment, period. And then teaching methodology, one of this one's would take a lot of explaining to do, but please, as I said before, take pictures of these things. Take a picture of this. And again, it's a chart in the book. Okay. And finally, the solution lies in institutions. The solution lies in institutions, as well as the teachings, as well as the vision. But the solution lies in institutions because if any one of these three is the institutions, the vision, or the teachings is wrong, then you don't have African-centered education. We've got to stop finding ways to compromise. It is what it is. It either is African-centered education or it's not. We keep trying to find ways around that so that we can live in a compromised world because we don't want to give up Urugu's way. We want to still live that lie. Carter G. Woodson said, blacks are the only people who take their most precious possessions, their children, and ask their oppressors to educate them, educate and to mold and shape their minds. Francis Chris Wilson said something very similar to that. Children are our greatest resource, and we're squandering it. We're squandering them. Malcolm X, only a fool would let his enemy teach his children. George Jackson, the most damaging thing a people in a colonial situation can do is to allow their children to attend any educational facility organized by the dominant enemy culture. That's whether you're talking about internal colonies or external colonies. I think this quote by Baba Sanyika, I use this often because this is very much a blanket statement about African-centered education relative to the institutions that are claiming to be African-centered, because African-centered become like just a catchword. It's become as useless for a lot of people on this planet as locks have become. Because for a lot of people, there's no political context to locks. It's just a fashion statement. Baba Sanyika said, our children must know and we must remind ourselves there's a difference between African education and that which simply purports to be African education, particularly that offered by charter schools or other such operations funded or conducted and thereby controlled by non-African organizations, corporations, or governments. Though some brothers and sisters in these programs are well-intentioned and some of these programs may display African symbolism, use our vocabulary, and justifiably boast of academic achievement, character education, and the like, even pride in our heritage. A fundamental, incontrovertible difference exists between these African-themed institutions and African-centered institutions. That fundamental difference lies in our purpose. As we move forward, we must advance that purpose and stop comparing ourselves to other schools. We must stop comparing ourselves to other schools. I see people doing that in the community all the time. We got to stop comparing ourselves with that which is not us. I compare myself with Urugu. There's no comparison. We are not other schools. We are teaching something we have been taught against learning. We are not just teaching our children about Africa, some Black first. We are teaching them to be African. Therefore, if the staff is not African-centered, then the curriculum and instruction cannot be African-centered. If the curriculum and instruction are not African-centered, then the institution is not African-centered. And here, Ajua, who also has done a lot of research in this area, if the schools, parents, teachers, and administrators, leadership teams cannot define the African worldview, they can't define it. That was one of the things that surprised her to receive. They couldn't define it. cannot define the African worldview, do not practice the African worldview in their daily lives, in their daily lifestyle, in their daily lives, how they live. Nor is there no mention of the African worldview anywhere in the school's handbooks, staff handbooks, school website, or wherever policies and procedures are listed. Then it is correct to state that the learning institutions in question, be it in a school, learning group, or education team, is not African-centered and therefore irresponsive to the cultural knowledge development of African students, African families, and African people as a whole. We have to be uncompromising, and everything needs to be completely and totally qualified along African lines. In the 60s and the 70s, I know at least in DC, but of course read about it in New Jersey and New York, Chicago, other places. Yeah, this community concept, school without walls. Well, we brought education back home to the grassroots. Of course, the universities were still the college, but they were also participating, and you've seen that close up. I've seen Howard University close up its outreach. I've seen Atlanta University almost completely close up its outreach to the surrounding community, and in fact, work to help destroy the local community of working class, lower class African people. We have to come to see communities as universities. Just like some of us are wise enough to see our homes as shrines and act accordingly. We need to come to see our communities as universities. Systematic, planned, ordered, purposeful education for everyone who wants it. Anybody who has a mind to learn, to think, whatever it is that they want to learn to think, then there needs to be a place in that community for them to learn that, for them to get that information, for them to access that, for them to see people practicing that. In these communities, all of these aspects, all of these things, all of these places are where education occurs. Independent schools and programs, homes, the internet. This is part of the community right here. Playgrounds, barbershops, hairdressers, any and everywhere we congregate or have our face in a computer monitor. That should be a place where we can receive an African education. Prison systems, weekend and evening, even in weekend adult education, rites of passage programs for all ages. Credentialism, of course, is a big problem. If you're not validated by Urugu, then obviously you don't know what you're talking about. One of the biggest farces placed on us ever. We need to turn it around so that our educators are validated by us, by African-centered individuals within the community. We need to have these all over the place, and with that occurring, the credit needs to be transferred. So if I'm in Cincinnati and I'm receiving African-centered sociology degree, if I have to move to New Orleans, then the community there should be able to accept my credits from where I came from and keep on rolling. And of course, it's important. Something Garvey recognized, I think he recognized it very well. People need to be able to look on their wall and see completion of classes or completion of courses or completion of degrees, whatever we want to call them. We need to have a circulation of warrior scholars. I saw Mama Virgie, Pearl Academy. She had a dream, and I'm assuming that she still has it, of taking the best scholars in our independent school. So the best scholar in math at whatever school that person is at, they get circulated to 5 different schools over the period of a week. So that all of the children get the best of him or her. And the person who's the best language arts person gets circulated in the same way. So you can have a circulation of scholars, so it's not limited. And we need to have the community assistance in finding spaces so we can have visiting warrior scholars. So let's say Mama Marimba wanted to do a tour, and at each school do a 1 month session or 1 month course on whatever. So there needs to be a place where she can live that she can call home in each one of these places so she can be comfortable while she's doing this. That's not such a far-fetched dream. There needs to be revolutionary ties incorporated into our thinking. It means we need to commit funds, resources to these institutions that we are building, that we are creating so that they can survive without having to be compromised by having to ask someone or something for funds that doesn't like us. You have to be funded well enough so that we can do what Wade Noble said, and that is to not commit treason against our ancestors, to be of good character by being who we are and teaching who we are and not lying to our children. And the final thing I want to make is about boarding schools. We need boarding schools. When we first, Enia and I talked about this when we were in graduate school years and years ago. And Enia was really against the idea for good reason. She didn't want children separated from their parents and of course understood that. And then we came up with the idea of, well, you get some land and you build housing places, units for the family to be there, whoever's part of the family to be there, and they can trade off, barter, you know, their rent or whatever for, you know, attending to the garden or the farm, and, you know, all the rest of this, we, you know, figure out a way. But I found it interesting, given how bad things have become in the last 30 years, that about 2 years ago, ENEI said, yeah, we need boarding schools. We need boarding schools for our children, year-round boarding schools for our children, because they need to get away from any exposure to Urugu. So we need to think about boarding schools. We need to think about every possible option available. Our elders read Fukiao's book on babysitting. Somebody first handed that to me, I was looking at them like they were babysitting. Well, I understand clearly now. And warriors need to rest. Those warrior scholars who work for us, I don't know why I'm always putting this last, but I've seen so many worn out, dead, beat. I've seen so many die from not understanding the importance of rest to being able to deliver the word to our people. And I'm 1 minute over. So we have time for Q&A. I'm gonna hand it back to Ian and Jadeka.
First of all, Medase pa 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 pa. Thank you very much. Those were true wisdom words, and I wish that we could spend a couple more hours with you. But the 45 minutes is better than no minutes at all. Yes, it is time now for Q&A. And as I had mentioned before, Baba, if you would go ahead and stop sharing your screen.
Yes, absolutely, Ani.
Okay, Medasi. And earlier I told you that you all have multiple ways of chiming in your questions. You can just come on the mic and ask a question. We are searching the chat box for questions, or you can raise your digital hand to get our attention. Okay, so go ahead and take some time now to get your questions out there. I'm actually going to start first, Bob, okay, please. We are at war. I recognize it. And as they say here in Ghana, it's not easy. It's not easy. But what I mean by that is to do what you have to do in order to stay consistent on the path. But we must. Here's my question. What would it look like, or what does it look like if it exists? I don't know too many institutions doing this, but what does it look like for an African-centered institution to implement a curriculum design? If you could give some examples of some curriculum design, if we acknowledge that part, if not a big part of the institution's mission objectives is based upon the fact that we know that we're at war. So what does that look like? Because a lot of so-called African-centered institutions have some very good courses. What I've observed is that there, to me, is not enough in the training of serious warfare. And that doesn't necessarily mean all classes have to be martial arts, weapons training, but certainly that's part of the whole thing. So what would you suggest as to be added?
Well, I would start an answer of that, which would take, I mean, it would take a long time to really, really answer that. But I would start that with what you've talked about, the mentality. And for me, one of the best examples has to do with security, because start the question out with, or the statement out with, we are at war. And that means that everything that we teach to the children should indicate to them in some way, shape, form, fashion that we believe that we are at war, that we understand that we're at war. They need to be able to see that in what we do and how we do what we do. You can't just say we're at war and then start talking about everything else and not relate that directly to the war conflict. So for me, it's something that I would like to see more of. I've seen some of, but I'd like to see more of. If we're at war, then the children, and they understand this when you act it out, when you perform it. So here at Octagon, we have security drills. We have either any of our eye will say a particular word, and the students know that when that word is said, that there is a threat outside of this house or outside of wherever we're at. And there's a certain protocol that they are supposed to do. There's a certain thing that they're supposed to do relative to that. They're supposed to get up, making no noise, and to immediately form a line, going to wherever that place is that we have designated for them to go to, where they will be the safest in that place, so that the adults can do the work of dealing with the enemy. And one of the children, I know this is an extended example, one of the children, one of the two oldest children, their job is to stand at the doorway of whatever that room that may be, and the other one, if there's a window in that space, for them to be at an angle where they can be hidden but still see outside of that window. So they get to practice it, and they understand. That when there's a new student, they kind of think that it's cute and funny, and and it's some way to get out of class for a minute. But then they come to understand, oh, this is serious. And when the children understand this, just like when you teach the children about sovereignty, that sovereignty should be their priority, that comes up. It's like for me, and understand what I'm saying, there doesn't need to be a curriculum. Of course, there does need to be, but there doesn't need to be a curriculum when the mind is geared toward African sovereignty, because everything that you present to the students is going to be somehow wrapped around African sovereignty. Every current event, every math problem, every essay that has to be written, every exercise, going outside to play, the way people are lined up, where everybody is at, the level of security when you walk out the door, all of that's going to be ground up in the two facts that we're at war, and African sovereignty is the ultimate goal. That's the ultimate vision. That's what we're supposed to be working toward. Nothing less than that.
Yes, indeed. Okay, give thanks. In the 8 minutes that we have left in this session, I want to at least get to the two brothers who have their their digital hands raised. Bill, Brother Bill, please ask your question, and then Brother Johnny, you go next. But just keep in mind, Baba, that we have limited time, but I'm sure you can answer it succinctly.
And I don't mind being cut off.
Baba Baruti, can you say a word about our own certifications, about certification bodies or organizations and things that already exist?
Well, we have CB, which is it's not as strong as it could be, but it's getting there. We really don't have a national or international certifying body that is African centered to the core. Most of the things that we talk about are things that we have to develop, but we of course have to have the idea first. What guidelines have to be laid down in terms of what we're talking about when we say certification. We need to make some kind, and I'm kind of looking at this haphazard because there are many aspects of this. One aspect of it is, well, how do you certify people who don't have quote unquote Eurocentric credentials? Okay, how do we measure the quality of somebody's heart, somebody's determination, somebody's willingness with love to teach African children? How do we measure? And I think these things need to be certified, if you will. I don't know how you certify that on paper, but they need to be certified, because I want to know. I don't care if you have 3 PhDs. Okay, is what you teach going to move us toward African sovereignty? Is the way that you do this going to show that you love African children and they're going to feel that? So, I mean, we've had a number of people over the years who had no credentials, but they knew their area of expertise. So how do you give credentials to someone who is teaching the children and training the children in raised bed farming? You know, we need to find a way to do that. That's very, very important for us to do that. I haven't even thought about how to go about the process of doing that, but I know that that's something that's going to have to be started from scratch, even though I said CB has, some guidelines. But the question which you just asked needs to be asked, okay, now where do we go from here in terms of that process? Somebody has it in their mind how to do that. Somebody has it in their mind to begin to put that down on paper so we can move forward from that. Somebody has it in their mind to have a conference of maybe a collection of serious African-centered educators where they can come together and start to write down, this curriculum that goes just beyond the subject or the subject matter.
Indeed.
Certification.
Medasi Baba. Brother Johnny, would you like to come on the mic and give your question, please?
Yeah, much respect, Brother Baruti. I just had a question in regards of just like, I plan on having kids in about a year, and things that I want to do is things that I can do to steer my child earlier on, also in regards to and any kind of grassroots things I can do in regards to helping the community or things like that. I'm in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania right now, and I know some of these things, these other things are kind of big, but if anything I can do grassroots wise, small time that could do a little change. That's all I had.
Well, one of the things that I would suggest is to find an institution that fits your mentality, fits the mentality you want to have passed on to your children, and start supporting it now, because you want it to be there when they're old enough to go to school. After they're born, you want it to be there for them when they get there. I've seen people do that before. I think it's a very intelligent and courageous step, because there's no guarantee that institution is going to live, but through the support, it can be made to live. I would also, and this is more like child rearing stuff, but I would also begin to accumulate that library, because there are many good, excellent books out there for our children today, and they won't be there when a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years from now. We have to remember the public library is social welfare. So if the taxes aren't paying for the existence, the survival of the public library system, then the books aren't going to be there that you might want to show your children. So we need to build those libraries for our children, and do that now. I would also suggest, and this is like more of a specialized thing, if you don't know how to play chess, learn how to play chess so you can teach it to the children. That's one of the best thinking tools, because they see it as a game. It's one of the best thinking tools out here, and of course, it's our creation. So, and there's a reason why. But the preparing yourself. Amos Wilson has 2 very, very important books on children and preparing for children, and having children, all the rest of that good stuff. But supporting the institutions that you want to have around. when your children come of age, when your children are old enough to be able to see stuff, when you want to take your children to this event or that event, those organizations need to be there. And our organizations are falling left and right because they're not supported the way that they need to be supported. These individuals are falling left and right because they're not being supported in the way that they, need to be supported. So that really, in the grassroots work, without you having to go out and create your own, find ones that are in existence and support them to the best of your ability. And people think that you got to give a lot. No, we have an individual who sends us $1 about every quarter of the year, and I know this individual, and I know that's what they can afford. I'm surprised they can send that. Okay? So it's not a matter of largesse, huge amounts of money, funding, et cetera, but we need to, just like other groups do, commit ourselves to tithing those organizations that reflect our interest, not just because they're Black. People say, well, buy Black, and I like the idea of buying Black, but we need to politically buy Black. I want to know if this person is supporting the African community that I'm supporting. If they're not supporting the African community, I don't care what they look like. I want to support those who support us. But they say, hold up that which holds you up.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Well said, Baba. Crystal clear, logical information. If only we can just follow it, and not only just for a week or every other month, but consistently, and then to the best of our ability, have infrastructure in place in order for our young people to carry the torch, carry the baton, and run with it. And we don't give up. We continue always, 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 always. I'd like for everyone to, if you want to take your, unmute your mic, and let's give a heartfelt thank you to Baba Baruti for all that he shared today. And I'd like to say, Medasi Pa, thank you, Baba, for the wealth of information. The slides are timeless. The information that the slides will be here many years from now. So give thanks for them. So Medasi Pa, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Baba. We appreciate you and what you and your wife do in the community. Thanks so much.
Medasi, I appreciate that. We appreciate that.
Thank you, Baba.
I'm telling you, it feels like we should keep going, but we actually need to stop. I have just a few more slides to remind you what's coming next. But Baba Baruti, again, we give thanks, and please carry your work on and on and on and on and on. Abibi Fahodie.
Bibi Fahodie.
Ashe.
Bibi Fahodie.
Bibi Fahodie. So the Black Sustainability Summit has, first of all, I'd like to give thanks and praises to the co-founders for the BSS. One of the co-founders, Sister Afia Reina, is in a certain condition right now that's about to bring a new ancestor, a king or a queen, into this material realm, this life realm. And just want to pause to send the most positive energy to her, as well as our ancestor. Thank you. And thank everyone who is part of the Black Sustainability Network. As you see, there's some contact information below. Jot that down if you didn't know it. Networking is very important, and they are working hard to bring like-minded Africans, sovereignty-seeking like-minded Africans together, closer and closer and closer. I also want to give thanks again to the BOOs, the Black-owned and operated sponsors for the 2021 Black Sustainability Summit, Black Handcraft, Nana Nobatu's Collard Green Festival, the Sustainable Communities Solutions Network, the Eco Womanist Institute, and the EDIKI, Aya International Development and Indigenous Knowledge Institute. So with that being said, again, thank you very much. Yabeshia Abio, and we will see you shortly. Upcoming next, there is a current, I think there's a workshop that's going on right now that is to end at 3, Don't Brace for Impact with Camila Sanders. But from 2:30 until 3:30 is What a Waste with Crystal Beasley. So find that on your information, and continue to enjoy this impactful summit. So thank you, everyone. So it is Mwalimu Baruti at gmail.com. And I'll type it out to Mwalimu.
Oh, that's straightforward.
It is Mwalimu Baruti at gmail.com. Give thanks for the question.
Okay.
And he and his complement have quarterly, if not even more frequently, but at least quarterly workshops on everything dealing with male-female development as an African-centered male-female development and more. So when you reach out to him, he's also on Facebook as well under Mwalimu Baruti.
Okay. All right. Well, we're going to go on to the next presentation. I'm going to end it in Medasi Pa.
Medasi Mama. Medasi Pa, and good day.
Cannot claim no victory till your heart pure and your mind.